John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory,
Welcome to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I'm your host, Leon, and this is a reading of the regimental history under the Maltese Cross, Antietam to Appomattox, the Loyal Uprising in western Pennsylvania, 1861 to 1865, Campaign's 155th Pennsylvania Regiment, narrated by the rank and file. And we are picking up at Perils of Vidette Duty by John M. Lancaster, Sergeant of Company E. The experience and special dangers of military duty on the Vidette outpost and the advance of Grant's army movements in the campaign of 1864 against Richmond is recalled from the time-stained pages of the writer's diary, and memories of service as corporal of picket guard on the night of June 2, 1864. Grant's invading columns had compelled the retirement of the Confederate forces of General Lee to within the outer fortifications of Richmond, erected at Cold Harbor. On that day, the 5th Corps, under General Warren, held an important position in the advance at Bethesda Church, and had erected earthworks and defenses of strength and position to resist the assault of the Corps of Confederates in front. Burnside's 9th Corps joined the 5th Corps, and was assigned with it to the duty of making demonstrations and attacks on the large bodies of the enemy to detain them from assisting General Lee in the defense of the Cold Harbor works, about to be stormed by Hancock's and Wright's Corps the following day. The enemy became active opposite the 5th and 9th Corps and made frequent assaults and drove in the pickets several times. It was on the night of this all day of brisk skirmishing and under these circumstances that the writer was ordered to report with a detail squad of 4 privates of Company E for special picket and vidette duty. The reserved picket post was immediately outside of the position and entrenchment partially occupied by the 155th Regiment. Captain Samuel Kilgore was the officer in charge of the picket guard on the eventful night. To the comrades of the company, it is the story of a brave and much beloved companion, whose death on this lonely post was unseen, save by God and the enemy. It also recalls to the surviving participants the successful recovery of the body of Private Theophilus S. Callan, under severe fire of the enemy. He was a handsome, stalwart country youth who had just attained his 18th year. The detail from Company E for that night's perilous duty consisted of Privates C.F. McKenna, Theophilus S. Callan, Newton Hipsley, and R.P. Douglas, in the order named. The first named went on duty at 10 p.m. in the woods, fronting the breastworks, and, taking a position at the foot of a tree, dug a pit to better conceal his person from the view of the enemy sharpshooters, who were keeping up a continuous fire. At the end of McKenna's 2 hours' round of duty in the position described, he answered the low whistle of Theophilus S. Callan, the agreed signal of the picket approaching to relieve him on the vidette post. The latter, on being relieved by Callan, warned him of the great risk and exposure to the enemy's fire. The 2 videttes quietly exchanged goodbyes as they parted for the last time in this world. McKenna, on being relieved, crawled back to the reserve picket post, and soon rolling into his blanket, took his much-needed rest, expecting not to be awakened until his second turn of vidette duty at the end of 4 hours was reached. 2 hours after Callan went on vidette post, Private Hipsley was awakened from his sleep on reserve picket and was sent out to relieve Callan. The latter did not reply to the whistle signal calls of Hipsley, and, after unsuccessful attempts under the prevailing fire of the enemy, to locate Callan's vidette post, Hipsley returned and reported his belief that Comrade Callan had been killed on his post. He also announced that the enemy had advanced their lines, and that a brisk firing from the Confederates was being kept up and was being answered from our lines. The writer, becoming much alarmed for the safety of Callan, who had been his continuous messmate throughout all the campaigns, aroused McKenna from his sleep and informed him of Hippisley's report and failure to relieve Callan. McKenna, being already familiar with the location of the Vidette post at which Callan had relieved him, promptly volunteered to crawl out to the position, expressing his belief that Callan was probably overcome by fatigue and had fallen asleep, and that through this napping he had failed to hear Hippisley's whistle. On approaching the tree used as a vidette post, he reached out to awaken Callan from his supposed sleep, and was startled to discover the body to be already rigid in death. McKenna at once hurried back from the range of the enemy's shots, and on reaching the breastworks reported the death to the writer, as corporal in charge of the detail. Captain Loughlin was aroused from his slumber to learn the sad news. He announced to the members of the company that he could not order any of his men to incur the great risk involved in advancing under the heavy firing of the enemy to the vidette post to recover the body of young Callan, but that if any companions would undertake to do it, they had his consent. Private McKenna at once offered to lead the way to any who would accompany him to the outpost, on the sad duty of recovering the body of their young comrade. The writer, accompanied by Private R.P. Douglas and Newton Hippisley, arranged to undertake the sorrowful mission, and followed McKenna on hands and knees, seeking protection of trees from the enemy sharpshooters, until they finally reached the fatal vidette post, where reposed the body of their companion. Avoiding noises and movements that might attract the attention of the enemy, the detail rolled the body on a blanket, and slowly and quietly carried the body back to the reserve picket post, and lifted it across the breastworks. The clouds shut off the moonlight in the woods during the sad journey, so that few shots from the enemy were fired at the rescue party on their return movements. Private Hippisley returned to serve his 2 hours' turn on the fatal vidette post, escaping all injury. He was relieved at early dawn by the advance of a strong skirmish line ordered by General Warren to drive the Confederates from the advanced position they had secured during the night. It was found at daylight, on examination of the body, that our comrade had been shot through the head, the ball entering just above the ear. His death was evidently instantaneous, as his gun was still in his grasp. Its chamber was empty, and his cartridges had dwindled to a few rounds, indicating his activity on the vidette post. At daybreak, inside the breastworks, under a young peach tree in the orchard through which the Union line of earthworks was constructed, we buried our beloved companion, being interrupted more than once during the sad ceremony by attacks of the enemy, requiring all to rally with their guns to duty in the breastworks close by. The burial recalled the well-known lines which young Callan had often recited at the village school of Apollo, entitled The Burial of Sir John Moore, commencing, "Not a drum was heard, not a funeral note, as his course to the rampart we hurried. Not a soldier discharged his farewell shot, or the grave where our hero we buried." A Sister's Pathetic Letter. In 1866, the writer accompanied the father of young Callan to the battlefield of Bethesda Church and assisted in the removal of the remains of his son to their final resting place in the village graveyard of Polk Run Presbyterian Church near Apollo, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. The grief of the family on the occasion of the second burial was much increased by the fact that Miss Louisa M. Callan, the favorite sister of Theophilus, in the meantime had died within 1 year after the tragic death of her brother, and was buried in the family lot. She had just attained her 20th year. Her death was pronounced by all to be due to the severity of the shock and grief occasioned by her only brother's death in battle. Her time-stained letter, now nearly 45 years old, written on receiving word of the death of Theophilus, and the pen sketch of his grave made at the time, are before me as I write. This reminiscence could close with no more fitting sentiment than is contained in the touching letter of a dear comrade's sister. Their ashes rest side by side in the peaceful country churchyard, and their spirits are united in the mansions of the skies. Point Home, near Apollo, June 12, 1864. J.N.O. M. Lancaster. Dear Friend, we received your letter to Father a few days ago, informing us of the death in battle of our only brother. It was a terrible shock to us all. It seems as though we can scarcely bear up under this great affliction. It was a hard trial to us the morning he bade us all farewell for a home on the tented field. I think I can see tears running down his young, innocent face as he said those sad words, "Goodbye." There appeared to be loneliness reigning in every place after he left us. But then we had one comfort. His cheerful letters came every week. It was his duty to go when his country called him, and he died in a good cause. He is happy now in the Lord's kingdom. Your kind letter gave us much comfort and consolation in our deep grief and sorrow. Accept our most sincere thanks for the pen sketch of dear Theophilus's last resting place. It was a sorrowful sight to us. We all wept over it. It was a kind gift, and extremely thoughtful of Charles McKenna to draw it. We will ever cherish it in remembrance of him as the last friend who spoke to our dear brother on this earth. When we think of Theophilus, all we can now see is that raised mound of clay and the headboard in the sketch. Father intends to have it framed. If my humble petitions have reached the throne of grace, every soldier's name is recorded in the Lamb's book of life, as it is now on earth. Accept our sincere thanks for the kind, interesting, and comforting letter. May you and all your comrades be rewarded for rescuing our dear brother's remains. I hope your lives may be spared, and you and your comrades be permitted to return to your peaceful homes. Respectfully, your friend, Louisa M. Callan. Story of the Regimental Surgeon by Dr. J. A. E. Reed, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The writer served with the regiment as surgeon from September 12, 1862, until January 2, 1865, and was in all its campaigns within that period. The exhaustive forced marches, the sudden change in their mode of life of the men from comfort and convenience to camp exposure produced much sickness in the first bivouacs and camps at Sharpsburg. The emergency that brought into the field so many thousands of new troops in so short a time taxed the government beyond its powers for immediate relief in the way of medical supplies and stores. Requisitions of General McClellan for tents, clothing, and medicines were unavailing. Through the liberality of many citizens of Pittsburgh, friends of the regiment, relief was supplied to the hospitals and camps where the 155th was lying. Among these contributions and visitors, the writer can recall James McCauley, James Park, Jr., James Loughlin, William Thompson, Samuel M. Keir, and Alexander Bradley, citizens of Pittsburgh. The next great occasion for the services of the surgical staff was at the Battle of Fredericksburg, where, night and day, in the field hospitals and the houses, churches, and public buildings utilized as hospitals, the 3 surgeons of the regiment were occupied in amputations and the treatment of the many badly wounded of the regiment and of Humphrey's division. On September 10, 1863, after the dismissal of Regimental Surgeon Hoffman, the writer was promoted to that position with the rank of major, Dr. W. Stockton Wilson becoming first assistant surgeon, the second assistant not being appointed until Dr. A. D. Tewksbury came to the regiment in July 1864. This period covered the great battles of Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, and the Wilderness Campaign. The service was very arduous and trying on surgeons. On May 3, 1863, after the Battle of Chancellorsville, where General Hooker abandoned his field hospitals and all of the sick and wounded, and retreated to the north side of the Rappahannock, the rider was in charge of some of the division hospitals of the 5th Corps, and fell into the hands of the enemy with all of the nurses and guards, together with several thousand wounded and sick Union soldiers. The rider, a non-combatant, was sent through the lines on May 8th and returned to the regiment then in camp near United States Ford. We were later permitted by the Confederates to return with an ambulance train and pass within the enemy's lines to convey those of the convalescent and badly wounded who could be moved back to our camps. This was under an agreed-upon flag of truce, and we were occupied 3 days in this duty. Many of the wounded were in such wretched condition as to be incapable of removal, and had to be left within the Confederate lines, with those of our men who had been hospital guards as nurses. Because of being armed guards, and having as such, under the rider's orders, destroyed large quantities of medical stores to prevent their falling into the hands of the enemy, these guards were treated by the Confederates as belligerents, and held as such for some weeks until their status could be determined at Richmond. While on the march to Gettysburg, the rider was appointed Surgeon-in-Chief of the 2nd Brigade, 1st Division, 5th Army Corps. It became his duty, in less than 10 days thereafter, to take charge of the great field hospital on Little Round Top, Gettysburg. The enormous losses in that battle, the many operations on account of gunshot wounds and from explosive shells, surpassed that of any previous engagement of the Civil War, because of the great numbers engaged. The surgeons of the Army of the Potomac were greatly insufficient in number for this great emergency. The patriotic members of the medical profession appeared promptly from all parts of Pennsylvania and adjoining states for immediate duty. Pittsburgh surgeons were among the first to report on Little Round Top on July 3, 1863. Before the cannonading had ceased to echo, the writer recalls the presence and active service of Doctors Thomas W. Shaw, John Dickens, John Dixon, A. G. Walter, G. L. McCook, Jr., Thomas J. Gallagher, Maury Jones, McCann, Childs, and Cornman, and many others whose names now cannot be recalled, who came to alleviate and cheer the wounded. Many of the field hospitals and operating tables were under heavy artillery fire July 2nd and 3rd. The surgeons' duties were very much increased when the Confederates retreated, abandoning their badly wounded and sick. This new charge, the duty of humanity, was assumed, and, with the care of our own wounded, occupied our whole attention for a month following the battle. It was a most exhausting experience. So much misery, so much suffering, with inadequate means of relief, adding to our solicitude and responsibility. The writer continued with the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteers as its surgeon during the following winter, when through the overland spring and summer campaigns under General Grant, in the great battles of the Wilderness, North Anna, Bethesda Church campaign, and before Richmond and during the siege of Petersburg. On November 11, 1864, owing to the arduous nature of the service and sickness, the writer asked to be relieved. The government withheld acceptance of the resignation until January 2, 1865. Drs. E. C. Kitchen was promoted from assistant surgeon of the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry and transferred to the writer's place. To attempt reminiscence of the affection of the association with the officers and men of the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteers at this late date would be a voluminous task. However, the writer cannot forbear expressing his great admiration for the manly, martial, and chivalrous qualities of the regimental officers and men with whom he had a most intimate relations. Colonels E. J. Allen, John H. Kane, and Alfred L. Pearson, Lieutenant Colonel John E. Wing, Major John A. Klein, Adjutant E. J. Montooth are all recalled with affection. A just tribute is due the memory of the ever-faithful Ellis Thorne, the faithful hospital steward, for his fidelity to duty and the strong affection he had for the comrades of the regiment, and cordial sympathy for suffering and pain of comrades requiring medical or surgical relief. All these men come to us in memory as gallant soldiers and gentlemen of high honor. To the men who stood behind the guns, space and time will fail to do justice. The stories of their devotion and duty are well told in these pages. It has been a matter of profound regret to the writer, whose home is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, remote from the lowest quo of the regimental nucleus in Pittsburgh and the seat of the regimental reunions, that he has not been able to fraternize with his comrades. The passing years have thinned their ranks, but their memories ever brighten. And that wraps it up for this episode. This was a very haunting episode from the very beginning. It feels like a tragedy story that somebody wrote. Not that it happened. Learning all of the exact details to one person's death and how and where it occurred. It makes me proud, though, of these soldiers. Really stepping up to the occasion. It's pretty amazing, actually. And because at any time, if they get discovered by the rebels, they could all start getting shot at. The rebels could come after them and capture them. Right at this range that they're talking about, they're all so close to each other. If they had the medal system that we have now, all of these guys, there's so many dudes here that would have like bronze stars and silver stars. All that they had was the Medal of Honor, which I think sucks a lot because these guys would have been just like stacked. Also, the sketch of Theophilus's resting place that they talk about wasn't included in the regimental history, so I'm going to put that on the website so you can come check it out if you like, along with some of the other pictures of the people involved. The letter from his family, I couldn't stop thinking about it after I had read it for hours. The sketch will be on the website. Come check it out. And for Dr. Reed in his short story that he's written for himself, I like how it was just like, yeah, I was cutting people's limbs off here and here and here, and it was hard. Guy had a crazy career in the war and just kind of goes about it so casually. Really interesting perspective, especially the Pennsylvania doctors coming out to save their boys. God bless them. So, other than that, I don't have a lot to talk about. It's Thanksgiving. Hope you guys had a great one, and you're with your friends and your family and your loved ones. Happy Thanksgiving from those of us here at War of the Rebellion to all of you. And bye-bye.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true and brave. In Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so few. blew, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves a traitorous crew, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see. Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny South the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. The conflict that he heralded, he looked from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall sing with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. The dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. For his soul